We are back with another personalization talk, this time from Michael from LexasCMS. He is the co-founder of a system where personalization is the heart of the content editing experience. And in this talk, he's going to show you how to use LexasCMS to create a personalized experience for Vue Storefront end users. I am really interested how this compared to the talk from Uniform, which is my talk. Let's check it out and go at it in the Q&A. Cheers.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael Donaldson. I'm one of the co-founders at LexasCMS, and today I'm going to be talking about how you can use LexasCMS with Vue Storefront 2 to create personalized customer experiences. So this talk is going to be roughly split into two parts. The first, I'm going to give you a bit of an intro into LexasCMS itself, and I'll explain what it is, why we created it, and I'll also take you through some of its unique features. The second is going to be more focused around Vue Storefront, and I'm going to demonstrate how you actually integrate LexasCMS with Vue Storefront 2, including all of the personalization and visual preview tools. So the first thing you're probably wondering is, what actually is LexasCMS? LexasCMS is a headless CMS, which is primarily focused towards e-commerce use cases. It was launched by myself and my co-founder David in June 2020, with the aim of being a go-to headless CMS for e-commerce. The second thing you might be thinking is, don't we already have a bunch of headless CMSs to choose from already, and do we really need another one? And if you look at the latest figures on headlesscms.org, you'll see that there are currently 85 headless CMS options to choose from. And while I definitely agree that this is a huge number, there are none which really hit the sweet spot when it comes to e-commerce. Important features such as personalization, scheduling, and visual previews are usually either missing, they're not flexible enough, or they simply just require too much custom integration work. So to take it back to the original question, we created LexasCMS because we felt that the e-commerce industry wasn't really being as well served as it could be. By focusing LexasCMS specifically on e-commerce, we could ensure that it provided the tools and features that storefront owners needed to actually run a successful business. As I've already mentioned, LexasCMS is primarily focused on e-commerce, but that isn't to say that you can't use it on other projects at all, since it does still offer all of the standard features that you would expect from a headless CMS. When we say e-commerce focused, all we mean is that in addition to that standard functionality, LexasCMS also offers features which are geared towards solving problems commonly faced by e-commerce businesses. In the next few slides, I'm going to briefly go through some of these features, and I'm going to start with personalized content. Now, content personalization is probably one of the most talked about topics in e-commerce right now. And before LexasCMS, personalizing your CMS content would normally have required you to buy in and integrate a third-party personalization platform. This platform would normally be used to determine which audiences or segments a customer belong to, and then developers would then use this information to manually query for the correct content from your CMS. But in my opinion, there are a few problems with this approach. The first is that it actually places quite a bit of burden on the developer's shoulders, since they're required to manually calculate and request the correct content from your CMS. By using two separate platforms, you're also creating a disconnect between the content itself and the personalization configuration, which in some cases can limit the editor's ability to actually experiment without needing to involve developers. The last problem is that by using this approach, you're actually requiring editors to not only learn, but also jump between two separate platforms, which adds additional friction to their day-to-day workflow. Now, as you can see from LexasCMS's workflow, this process is much simpler. We've not only removed the need for the additional third-party platform, but we've also removed all of the complex logic from your application code as well. All you need to do is ask LexasCMS for a specific piece of content, describe the customer who's making the request, and our content delivery API will automatically calculate and return the most relevant content variation for that customer. This calculation is based on rules and conditions which you have already predefined, and is not only better in terms of loading and performance, but since all of the personalization and config happens within Lexas itself, editors are able to actually control both the content and the personalization from within the same user interface. Now, the next feature that I'd like to briefly mention is content scheduling. In my opinion, scheduling is part of an e-commerce which doesn't really often get the attention that it deserves. Most e-commerce businesses will actually plan their content and their marketing campaigns, weeks or even months in advance. And so to us, it really makes sense that their CMS should also allow them to actually input those plans into the system and then in a sense have it automatically play through them. With LexasCMS, as well as being able to target content variations at specific audiences, you're also able to target them at certain points in time as well. To give a simple example of a homepage, by creating scheduled variations for each week or month of the year, you would very easily be able to control how a website's homepage content changed over the course of 12 months. As well as this, LexasCMS also provides a calendar-based planner view. This not only allows content editors to quickly see which content is currently being served right now, but also provides a high-level view for both past and upcoming content changes. Now, with scheduling and personalization both in mind, I'd like to move on to visual previews. So with visual previews, being able to actually physically see how your content looks in place, it's obviously something which is incredibly important for content editors to be able to do. And I think that this becomes even more true when you introduce the possibility that that content could be being either personalized for each customer, or it could also be changing based on the current date or time. Providing content editors with the ability to actually personalize and schedule content is one thing, but if at the end of the day they aren't able to also visualize and preview how that content will actually, what content will actually be delivered, then they're effectively just going to be left guessing at what the end customer is going to see. And so our main aim for the visual preview feature in Lexas was to provide that visual tool for content editors and marketing teams, which would allow them to actually navigate around their website in the context of different audiences and at different dates and times. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, there is a very well-known link between web performance and conversion rates. And one of the unfortunate side effects of that personalization has is that the more heavily you use it, the less likely it is that the requested content will actually be cached. Now, as a result, you would naturally expect this to actually have a negative impact on the loading times and performance of your website. However, in order to actually resolve this problem, we've designed LexasCMS with a unique multi-region infrastructure. This infrastructure is capable of simultaneously delivering your content from multiple regions around the globe, and it will automatically deliver that content from whichever region is closest to your end customer. Currently, we have regions available in 2 geographic locations, with one being in the US and the second being in Ireland. However, we do have plans to expand this number to around 20 locations by the end of Q2 this year. As you can see from the map, our regions will be distributed right across the globe, which will allow LexasCMS to consistently deliver fast response times, regardless of whether the requested content is cached or not. Now, the final feature I want to talk about briefly is e-commerce integrations. Since LexasCMS is focused on e-commerce, it makes sense that we would also provide direct integrations with several e-com platforms. And that's why I'm happy to say that by the end of April, we'll be shipping our first integration, which will be for the Magento 2 platform. Following on from the Magento 2 integration, we also plan to ship support for many other platforms, such as Shopify and Commerce Tools in the very near future, to name a few. These integrations will work alongside LexasCMS's personalization and scheduling features and enable you to implement features such as product recommendations, which are not only personalized, but are also scheduled to change over time. And so now that you know a bit more about LexasCMS itself, I want to spend the second half of this talk speaking about Vue Storefront and how these two technologies can work together. I know that many of you have probably already seen this diagram before, and so I'm not going to bore you with all of the same details again, but I would like to spend just a little bit of time running through the specific pieces which are actually relevant to LexasCMS's own integration. In Vue Storefront 2, CMS integrations are generally made up of the use content, composable, and an API client server middleware. As well as managing loading states and error handling, the use content composable's main job is to manage calls between itself and the server middleware. The server middleware is then responsible for managing calls between the integration itself and the service which is being integrated with. So in this case, LexasCMS. It's also where a majority of the work actually takes place within the integration. If we look at the LexasCMS integration specifically, we can get a better idea of how all of these pieces actually work together. From the diagram, you can see that by calling the search function from the use content composable, we're actually sending a post request to the API client server middleware. The server middleware will then capture this request, attach any required information, such as that for personalization or previews. It will then forward that request on to the LexasCMS's content delivery API. And once a response for that request is received, The response will then be passed from the server middleware back to the composable for the developer to handle as necessary, whether that be to handle any errors that occurred or to render the returned content. So now that I've actually explained how the integration works, I'm going to run through a demo that actually shows you how to integrate Lexas with Vue Storefront 2. I'll also show you how to implement LexasCMS's personalization and visual preview features. So as you can see, I've generated a new Vue Storefront 2 project using the Vue Storefront CLI. I've also started the development server, which if we open the browser and navigate to localhost port 3000, we can see it's running successfully. Now, what we're actually going to be doing in this demo is updating the promo banner at the top of the homepage to be powered by LexasCMS. We're also going to be implementing LexasCMS's personalization and visual preview tools to give you a bit of a better idea of how those work. Now, the first thing we need to do is actually jump back into our terminal, exit out of the development server, and we're going to install LexasCMS's Vue Storefront integration module. So to do that, we yarn add LexasCMS, VSF LexasCMS. Now, once that's actually finished, what we're going to do is open the project within your code editor. I'm using VS Code, and navigate into the nuxt-config.js file. Now, within this file, you're going to locate the build modules config option. And at the bottom of that option, we're going to add the VSF LexasCMS Nuxt module. Now, all this does is automatically configures the LexasCMS integration with Nuxt. Once you've done that, save the file and move over to the middleware.config.js file. This is where you set up and configure all of the server middlewares for Vue Storefront. Now, as you can see, there's already one for commerce tools here. So after that one, we're just going to add in LexasCMS, define where the server middleware is actually located, and then define some configuration. Now, with this one at the moment, all we're going to do is actually define a space ID, but obviously we can't actually do that until you've created a space within Lexas. Now, I've already actually created one just to save a little bit of time, but if you wanted to create the same space as I have here, you could create your own using the Vue Storefront tutorial starter template. Once you've actually got your space, you want to go into the general settings and locate the space ID as you can see here. Copy the space ID using the copy button, and then go back into your middleware config and paste in the space ID. So once you've done that, what we need to do is actually head over back to the terminal, and we're going to restart the development server. And then while that's actually restarting, we can start making some changes to our homepage. So if you open the homepage component and scroll down to the script portion, what we need to do here is actually import a couple of new modules, like so. The first one being the onSSR helper from the Vue Storefront core module. All this does is lets us execute code on the server side, but then not have it rerun on the client side. We're going to use it to make sure that we're only fetching content during server-side rendering and not unnecessarily refetching on the client side. The second thing we import is the use content composable, which we mentioned earlier in the talk. This is just imported from the LexasCMS Vue Storefront integration. Now, once you've imported those two modules, what you want to do is actually define a setup function like so. And all we're doing here is using the use content composable and using it to actually retrieve the promo banners from LexasCMS. Now, this is all done within the onSSR helper, which we mentioned a second ago, to make sure that content is only fetched during server-side rendering. Now, at the bottom of the setup function, we're also returning the promo banners variable, which is actually an alias of the content variable from the content property from the use content composable. What this does is makes the promo banners variable accessible or available rather to the template. Now, if we scroll up to the top of the template, we can see that this is the portion of the template which is responsible for actually rendering the promo banner. What we're going to actually want to do is replace this with an updated version, which I'll put below so we can see the difference. Now, as you can see, there's not really a great deal of difference here. All the main bulk of the difference is that we're looping through the promo banners variable instead of the heroes. Now, all this is going to do is actually generate an instance of the SF hero item component for each promo banner that is returned from Lexas. So if we remove the old code, then back into the browser and refresh our page, we can now see that content is actually being pulled from LexasCMS. So the next thing we actually need to do is implement personalization. To do this, we actually want to head back into LexasCMS first, as the first thing we need to do is actually configure and set up the personalization from this side of things. Now, in LexasCMS, you create multiple variations of your content items, and then each of these variations can be assigned to an audience. Now, to determine when a customer falls into an audience, you use audience attributes. So in this example, what we're going to actually do is we're going to personalize the promo banner based on the customer's local temperature. In a normal world scenario, you would likely use a third-party weather API to determine the local temperature. However, just to keep things simple, what we're going to do is actually define a local temp query parameter, which we can use to control what the local temperature is. So to actually start implementing this, what we need to do is create a new audience attribute called local temperature. Assign that as a number. Okay, and then now that's been created, what we want to do now is create a new audience. So this audience I'm actually just going to call cold climate, since it will just contain customers who are located within an area that has a cold climate. And then now that that's been created, we can define the conditions which determine whether a customer falls into this audience or not. So for this particular audience, the rules are quite simple. We want to create an attribute condition, which is linked to the local temperature attribute, which we just created. We then want to set the comparator to less than or equal to, with a value of 10. Now, what this actually does, what this actually is saying is that customers will fall into this audience if their local temperature is less than or equal to 10. So customers with a local temperature of 5 will be part of the cold climate category, whereas customers with a local temperature of 25 degrees would not. So now that we've actually created the audience, we need to actually define some content which is assigned to it. So if we jump over to the content section, and then we will go into the first promo banner content item, you can see that there's currently only one variation in here. It's not assigned to any audiences or doesn't have a schedule. So that means it just gets delivered to everybody. We click on the create variation button, and we'll just call this variation cold climate. And then what we'll do for the content is we'll say cold climate heading. Let's give it a test subheading. Button text could be shot now. And then for the background image, we'll just select something that's already in the media library. Now, the most important thing at this point is that we need to assign this variation to our audience, which you can do from over here in the sidebar. So what we're going to do is click the add audience link. That brings up a modal to allow you to actually assign it to an audience. From the dropdown, we're going to select the cold climate audience, which we actually created just a moment ago. Click on the confirm button, enable the publish flag, and click save changes. So now if we actually hop back out of this variation, you can now see that there are two variations for this content item. Now, when it comes to LexasCMS actually resolving which variation to deliver, it effectively starts at the top of the list and works down until it finds one which matches. So for customers who were a part of the cold climate audience, they would be delivered the cold climate variation. However, a customer with, say, a local temperature of 25 who didn't match that, the conditions for that audience, they would instead be delivered this default variation. So the next thing we actually need to do is go and update our homepage to actually provide the values for our audience attributes. So we go back into our code editor and scroll back down to the setup function which we created. At the top of this function, we want to create what we call a request context. So when you request content from LexasCMS, alongside that request, you can also provide a request context, which provides the values for your audience attributes. These values then get used to calculate and determine which variation should be retrieved or should be sent back to that customer. Now, like we mentioned, we're going to be using a query parameter to determine the local temperature. So what we'll need to do here is actually gain access to those through the context. Okay. Now, so what this code's doing is it's retrieving the value of the local temp query parameter. We're then checking if it's defined or not. If it is defined, we are creating a request context in which we define the value of the local temperature audience attribute to be the value of that query parameter. Now, once we've actually gone ahead and created the request context, all we need to do is actually pass it to LexasCMS. So that can be done by passing the context key to our search function, which will then give the request context. Okay, so if we now go back to our terminal, make sure that it has rebuilt, which it has, we can now reload this page. Now, as you'll notice, nothing's changed yet, but that's just because we haven't actually provided this query parameter. If we go ahead and actually define this and say local temp is 5, you can see that it is now actually successfully requesting the personalized content. If we updated this value to be 25 instead, then it wouldn't receive that new variation. So the final part of the demo really is we want to enable our content editors to be able to do this within the visual preview environment. So the first part of this is to create an API key, which can be done from within LexasCMS. So navigate back into LexasCMS and open the settings and the API key section. Click on the create API key button, and then we'll just give this a name. I'll just call it local development for now. Be sure to actually enable the preview permission because that's required. And then once you've actually created this API key, we can copy the API key token, which was generated, head back over to your middleware config, and then add an API key property here and paste in the newly generated API token. So now that we've actually updated the middleware config, we'll need to restart our development server. And while that restarts, we're going to install the LexasCMS JavaScript snippet. Now, when using the visual preview tool, we require that you install a small JavaScript snippet onto your page. All the snippet does is it allows your project to actually connect to the LexasCMS visual preview tool in order to actually transmit messages back and forth so that we can kind of update your application and tell it what content should actually be loaded. Now, with Nuxt, you can't actually just paste in this snippet. There's a little bit of a different process, so I'm just going to take you through that now. So if we go back into your code editor and open up the Nuxt config.js file, you scroll up a little bit and you will find the script config here. Now, in that array, what we're going to do is actually paste in a new object. Now, what this actually does is creates a new script tag with an internal ID of LexasCMS. It sets the defer tag to true so that we defer the loading of this script. And then the inner HTML of the script tag is set to be the same as is in the documentation. Now, as it stands, the inner HTML property here would actually be sanitized and it would stop the JavaScript from executing successfully. But since we know that the contents of this script tag is safe, we can actually go ahead and disable the sanitization for just that particular tag. Okay, so now that we've done that, we need to make a small change in our homepage script. So if we move back over to the home.vue file, and then when a project is actually loaded within our visual preview tool, we define a new query parameter called LexasCMS request context. Now, the value of this query parameter is actually a pre-encoded request context. So what we actually want to do is, if that query parameter is defined, we want to use its value as the request context for every single request that we make to Lexas. So the first thing we need to do is actually gain access to that query parameter, which we can do like so. And then once we have access to that, we then want to say, okay, so if LexasCMS request context is not equal to defined, then we will set the request context variable to its value. If it isn't defined, then we will just continue with the behavior that we had previously. Now, once that's done, that's the only code change that we need to make. And what we need to do now is actually head back into LexasCMS and configure our preview. So to do that, we head into the settings previews section, click the create preview button, give it a name. I'll just call it local development. And then the preview URL, you just define wherever your environment is located. In this case, it's localhost port 3000. Okay. Now from this point, what we can do is actually navigate into the content preview section. Okay, and as you can see, your project is actually loaded up in the visual preview tool, and you now have access to these tools on the right-hand side. Now, if a content editor, for example, wanted to preview what this homepage would look like to a user whose local temperature was 5 degrees, all they would need to do is click this update button, add the local temperature attribute, define its value as 5, click confirm, and then click the update preview button. Now, as you can see, the preview is updated successfully. The cold climate variation is now being displayed because the local temperature is 5. If we also then update that to be 25 degrees, then as you would expect, we would no longer actually get that variation. So that brings me to the end of the demo, and also actually brings me to the end of the talk. If you have any further questions, or you're just interested in learning a little bit more about LexasCMS and what we're doing, we are running a Q&A session shortly after this talk. Alternatively, if you want to get in touch, you can find me on Twitter and GitHub using the details on the slide. But other than that, thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.